Hello all, and now I wanted to start a discussion about Hobbes and Leviathan, um, and really get at what he's trying to do and continue our kind of like canon discussion and themes that we've been building in past videos as we've been going through, um, the Western canon. Um, so now we're, up to Hobbes and the English Civil War, although he's born um, during the age of the Armada. Um, so I guess it's kind of, obvious and pretty rudimentary to, see that he's coming from a background of, a lot of turmoil religiously, and, you know, pretty much, all of the kind of institutions or even lack thereof are in conflict with each other. I guess just to really get at it from the start here is I actually do kind of like Hobbes in a lot of ways, which might be heretical to some people who are watching this, but I actually think that Hobbes is kind of the archetype of what the sort of modern liberal thinks of the world, and what they suppose out of the idea of a not just the uh, a proper sovereign, what political authority actually is in and of itself, but the basis in which he builds it out of. And so he wants to actually try to, put a kind of empirical end to these kind of discussions. He wants Leviathan actually was supposed to, in theory, was supposed to, be as uncontroversial as possible because he's supposed to be speaking and building an ethic out of these, agreed upon principles of science and right reason. And so he wants to start obviously with the senses because he wants to eventually build to the political body. The senses is something that we can agree on in his kind of nominal way of looking at things and the kind of subjectivity of it. But he's going to turn to, the geometric proofs that, Galileo and the new method and during his even time with Francis Bacon, where, he wants to kind of come at it in a more complex way than Bacon would in my last video where we talked about his sort of legacy as well. But, what he's trying to get at and, where he talks first about, the brain and perception, is to understand that, this is a causal process. The brain's processes has a causal aspect to it, and thus, if we can use these kind of cause and effect circumstance, what if we applied that to the greater world in a kind of historical way? But it could be kind of interesting that he actually has this sort of Christian material perspective on these sort of matters, even though in his time in even exile he was considered an atheist, and even to this day you can see people still it's easy to kind of look at his sort of legacy and come to that kind of conclusion, but actually I actually think of him more as a kind of Christian materialist. He thinks of God as a material being. It's kind of interesting maybe to look at how Hobbes clearly has a sort of late stage Hellenic sort of Stoic mindset, where Damascus and the atom and the sort of material soul that we talked about a couple weeks ago now. But that actually could be an interesting way to synthesize with some of the ideas I've been thinking about the last few days, where you have Hobbes and coming up soon with other British empirical ideas and thinkers. We reference these sort of laws and sort of this historical approach of understanding our own our own kind of civil and social history, if you will, that ultimately the written down accounts are actually sort of degradation from the customs and processes of past authorities and monarchs. And it is kind of interesting maybe to consider that Hobbes is going to kind of argue, but it would be more in like of Rousseau and Locke later. The social contract, we kind of we were in the state of nature, and it's the state of war, and it's brutish, and so we're going to kind of choose safety, choose to look out for ourselves towards a sovereign for the sake of peace, and that's really all there is to it, towards this kind of laying the foundation for the social civil contract that I think goes hand in hand with, like I said, that Hobbes is actually one of my favorite Anglo thinkers and intellectuals, because he actually is pretty honest and foregoing about his sort of self-interested mindset. And if you're just going to assume that everyone's going to be just obviously vestigially tied to self-interest always, then that's all you'll ever do as well. You'll never try to look beyond this kind of materialistic approach, this sort of plundering of trying to harness nature as a sort of independence from yourself as humankind, to kind of rein it in a kind of Baconian sort of way, I would say. But it is kind of interesting to look at, where he sets the stage for, the modern liberal state. Even though he obviously is an avowed monarchist, he, says that we should just delegate towards the sovereign. He's still, in this kind of paradoxical way that I kind of foreshadowed in prior videos, the paradox of authority, to be specific. Hobbes is obviously this sort of monarchist. The monarchy is kind of this, extension of the father, of the man of the house, if you will. This kind of man of the political body, the man of what would become the nation state. And so, it's kind of interesting to see perhaps how in his legacy everyone sees, Hobbes, well, maybe not everyone, but certainly a lot of contemporary thinkers outside of the sphere, see him as this obvious authoritarian, and he's wrong for these sort of things. But I actually think he's what liberalism would have required out of a sovereign, to be able to actually preserve the peace, to be able to actually withhold subjects to these sort of democratic rights, would have actually required this sort of sovereign that Hobbes is talking about. The sovereign is who decides, what is truthful scientific statements. And, I guess the point really is that, Hobbes is just being more explicit about it. He's just, being, I guess, straight up with us, as opposed to in the kind of, concealment that we talk about all the time in the kind of spheres that's been going on for years now. But it also is kind of interesting to see, perhaps, the idea of the political border in the modern nation state, and its kind of collapse even, right now, quite literally. And the kind of, falling away of the actual political body and the senses. Hobbes's theory in Leviathan, at its root, I think, in this hypermodern experience, actually isn't compatible anymore, simply because of the state of technology itself, where our senses are, stretched to such a degree, any kind of consensus that we could hope to have, or these kind of republic ideals that Hobbes still flirts with throughout this whole text. This is how he does end up being kind of the forefather of modernity out of, his politic, even though many people would consider it paradoxical. I think this kind of goes back to the sort of, how do we keep going back through these sort of reactionary ideas, these reactionary thinkers, and yet they are usually centered around this kind of idea of progress, eventually culminating in what in many regards we have now, but I don't think people anticipated some of the effects, if you will, that Hobbes would probably say. But it is also important to perhaps look at cause and effect, and its history. It certainly has tons of implications for Kant, for German idealism, for philosophy, and the direction of civilization from here on out in this sort of canon way. We're talking about one of the most important modelings of modernity, but as we're talking in this sort of postmodern experience now, you can kind of perhaps consider that when Thomas Pynchon, for example, talks about the rocket in Gravity's Rainbow, one of the big themes is the sound of the rocket already means it's too late. It's already landed. Your perception of sound is actually misguided, because the rocket, had already landed, and it's too late for you. And these kind of technological advances where cause and effect actually comes into question, it's easy to see how this tradition has fallen by the wayside, and how we could go from someone like Hobbes, who sees the sovereign in this sort of way, totally be stripped away from kind of the idea of someone actually having the title of deciding what is a truthful statement, even though it actually does happen anyway. I guess that would be the other point as well, is it's more about the kind of concealment, as I've been trying to get at, and I think it also is important to point out that Hobbes does have this sort of door towards equality and egalitarian ideas. And as you can imagine in contemporary times today, there's a lot of problems with that. And if everyone's sort of equal, then everyone kind of just becomes a sort of subject. You're no longer the kind of citizen or member of this sort of community that you once were, because you don't have the same sort of what I guess you would consider kind of that fatherly say that goes back to the extension of the monarch, the extension of the father. This is totally stripped away now. This kind of interactivity that I think really I talked about kind of in a vague sort of way in my past Aristotle videos, where Aristotle wants to build his polis, and he kind of sees the necessity of this sort of small checked and balanced sort of market, because you want to have that sort of democratic, the kind of republican and democratic idea of everyone's interacting with this actual system. Everyone's actually a part of this political body, quite literally in the Hobbesian sense. But when it actually comes to exceptional events or happenings, and where authority actually has to be a little bit more robust for its own preservation, if you will, then having this kind of egalitarian system where everyone sees themselves as these kind of equal so-called citizens, but really subjects who their vote is just as valid as any other vote, ultimately means that you don't really have an authority at all. You just kind of have this sort of cross-reference towards each other. Everyone can kind of say, well, I disregard what your interpretation of this these ideas are. And it's kind of interesting perhaps to also push in that kind of direction as well, where Hobbes is clearly inspired to some degree by Occam and the kind of nominal accounting for everything. And if you're going to account for everything, and this maybe this is this is the gift of hindsight, I suppose. You can see in this kind of internet experience now that accounting for everything has the repercussions of diluting yourself from actually forming a coherent sort of message, and instead you just kind of have this mishmash of all these different ideas put together, which in a kind of sense is actually what is being done here, or what will continue to be done here and across Europe, where you have these mishmash of different traditions that are written down because they're being forgotten. And so in that sort of sense, it's kind of like trying to build politics out of the ashes of what once was. And yeah, I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the speech and language idea, and going towards speech being as and it's kind of like customs and its sort of interaction of not really needing to enforce the cultural mandate by writing it down to remind people to adhere to it, or you didn't really need to question these things because they were simply legitimate in and of it themselves, which I know kind of is a mouthful, but now that we're in this kind of constant abstract ideas of people themselves, in this sort of lockdown paradigm that just continues. I always hear this sort of optimism that, and even myself, I must profess, is like, okay, well, this is where, things are going to pick up, and everyone's going to come to their senses. I guess that would be the theme, and ultimately they have focused in on these sort of particulars of their own sort of science, but they can inoculate themselves with that kind of thing. And this goes the same vice versa for us as well. We can't afford to necessarily look at it in this sort of as if there isn't these sort of echo chambers, if you will. I guess that's kind of an old school term nowadays, but I guess above all else, my main contingency would be that I disagree with Hobbes, and that civil society arises out of these kind of antisocial attitudes towards a kind of central sovereign out of necessity for survival. I would have to disagree with the idea that that's us getting away from nature and the kind of extension of authority as land expansion as an empire fleshes out. The delegation of authority also rises and becomes more abstract and less concrete, and I believe that actually is a part of nature itself. That's not us being more civil. That's within our nature. And I think if you look at it from that sort of angle, you could perhaps get more in line with not making the same sort of mistakes that we have seen in past incarnations of our political thoughts, where we kind of just end up back in these same sort of ways of looking at rights and mainly just the way we perceive authoritarianism and these sort of terms that have just been totally given up to the idea that everything outside of the current paradigm just either isn't pragmatic at all, or is just going to be this sort of state of war that Hobbes is talking about. And I think that would be the main contingency to really take away from this sort of father of coming modern liberal thought. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.